In this video, I'll be explaining how diuretics are used to control blood pressure. We're going to be looking at what the main kind of diuretics are, how they work, and what their side effects are. We'll be looking first at loop diuretics, and then thiazides, and then the potassium-sparing drugs. To understand how they work, we need to think about the way the nephron works to understand the different sites for diuretics. There are four main sites for diuretics. There's the glomerulus, the loop, the distal tubule, and the collecting tubule. The three main kinds of diuretic are the loop diuretics, which work on the loop of Henle where there is a sodium-potassium chloride transporter. And that's found here. The second type is the thiazides, which work in the distal tubule on a sodium chloride transporter. Notice the difference between the two. Finally, we have the potassium-sparing diuretics, which work in the collecting duct by operating on sodium channels. Let's focus on the loop diuretics. Loop diuretics inhibit the sodium potassium chloride transporter here. By doing so, they prevent the reabsorption of water in the loop of Henle. The most common loop diuretic is furosemide. And just a reminder that furosemide blocks this transporter and prevents sodium reabsorption, and that causes loss of water. So we've done loop diuretics. Now let's look at thiazides. Thiazides block ion reabsorption in the distal tubule, and because water follows salt, that also blocks water reabsorption and therefore causes water loss. Thiazides have a nitrogen and a sulfur in the same ring. One of these is not a true thiazide, but it's treated as if it was a thiazide. So we looked at loop diuretics, we looked at thiazides. Now let's look at the potassium-sparing drugs, which work in the collecting duct. The best known ones, they block sodium channels, and we also have aldosterone antagonists. So that means there are actually two types of potassium-sparing diuretic. sodium channel blockers and aldosterone antagonists. Sodium channel blockers block sodium channels, and aldosterone antagonists block aldosterone receptors. So here we have chloride and sodium reabsorption being mediated by aldosterone receptor activation gates these channels, and amiloride directly blocks them. Spironolactone stops aldosterone opening these channels. The best known aldosterone antagonists are eplerenone and spironolactone. You don't need to know the structures, but you do need to be able to recognize something of their features, such as their similarity to cholesterol. Spironolactone binds competitively to the aldosterone receptor. It doesn't work very well when it's given alone, and I wonder if you can work out why. The answer is that most water reabsorption occurs before it gets to this part of the nephron, but it is very effective when it's taken in combination with the loop diuretic. Two well-known sodium blockers, the best known is amiloride, but also triamterene. Why do we call them potassium-sparing diuretics? It's because the others aren't potassium-sparing. As you can see, the loop diuretics will prevent the reuptake of potassium, so there will be loss of potassium when you block this pump with loop diuretics. Thiazides only block a sodium-potassium transporter. And the reason is because the uptake of sodium being blocked, you now have excess sodium going down the tubule, and that stimulates the reuptake of potassium. Sorry, not the reuptake, sorry, it stimulates the reuptake of sodium at the expense of potassium. And so then potassium gets excreted, so they're not potassium sparing. So when you compare these diuretics, you've got a choice. They differ in terms of their effect on what ions you lose. So with the thiazides and the loops, you lose both sodium and potassium, whereas you don't get that with the potassium-sparing drugs. So there's a difference in the mode of action. There's also a difference in the pharmacology, in the pharmacokinetics. So we have quite a big difference in the T-half between the different types of drugs, the duration of action, and when they peak.